Écoutez le monde vétérinaire autrement sur Veto Micro, un podcast produit par Thémavet.
Bonjour, je suis Colline Musel, vétérinaire, coach, formatrice et cofondatrice de Wondervet.
Et moi je suis Marine Slove, vétérinaire, entrepreneur, podcasteuse et fondatrice de Thémavet.
Bienvenue sur le podcast numéro 1 de la profession qui démontre qu'il y a 1000 façons d'être vétérinaire. Vous entendrez ici des consoeurs et des confrères, qu'ils soient praticiens ou non, raconter leur parcours professionnel, leurs réussites et les joies qui vont avec, mais aussi leurs difficultés et leurs échecs.
C'est toujours avec le même enthousiasme que nous prêtons notre micro aux vétérinaires pour la 3e saison consécutive, pour continuer à nous raconter tels que nous sommes vraiment, interroger notre quotidien professionnel bien sûr, mais aussi et avant tout notre rapport à la vie, au monde animal et à la planète.
Le tout saupoudré d'une bonne dose de déculpabilisation.
Vous êtes ici chez nous.
Mais surtout, vous êtes ici chez vous.
Belle écoute! Aujourd'hui, Colline et moi vous laissons en compagnie de Sophie Wilford, vétote multicasquette et multinationale, pour une aventure vétérinaire 100% internationale.
This week on Veto Micro, we are going international once again and heading this time to the Falklands. For those of you who don't know where it is, please look on a map, but it's east off the coast of Argentina. We are meeting tonight the truly wonderful wilderness vet, Caroline Murray. Hi, Caroline.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity.
Most welcome. Thank you for accepting the invitation. So, Caroline and I met a wee while back in the outback of wild Mongolia and instantly connected. It's been a really long time since we actually talked, so I reckon I'm in for plenty of surprises. And when I asked her what she wanted to talk about, she said, canine arthritis, pain management, house visit stuff, female holistic health coaching, the book she wanted to write about, vet adventures, but also brain, body, gut stuff. Oh, yes, and also a TED Talk in the making. So I'm pretty sure we have a fair bit of catching up to do. And so we better get cracking. Caroline, are you ready?
I am ready.
So my first traditional question on this podcast is, why did you decide to become a vet?
So, I've always loved being around animals and I've loved wildlife and nature. And since I was really young, I've had the opportunity to go horse riding, and we had hamsters and dogs. And also I really like learning and solving problems and helping other people. And I like a lot of variety in work and general life. And I used to skive off school sports to ride my pony. So originally I wanted to be a famous show jumper, but then I realized I was actually scared of big jumps. And then when I was a teenager, I did some work experience at a vet's and realized that it's really varied. There's lots of different things you can do. I really love surgery and you're always learning. So I decided that was the next best thing to the famous show jumper. And also you can travel a lot with it, which is one of my favorite things to do.
So early on, you already had in mind that traveling would be something that you would combine with your career?
Yes, and something with animals as well, but I didn't really know what at that point.
So whereabouts did you study? And how did that go?
So I went to Liverpool Vet School, which was kind of the furthest away in England from where I lived, mainly because I did French A-level instead of physics, which made it quite difficult to get into vet school, but actually has been more useful than anything because it's really helped with the travel. So I loved being a student at Liverpool. It was a great city to be in. And I've still got lots of friends from there. But the studies were quite kind of rocky. I found it quite overwhelming, the amount of stuff we had to learn. And then the more you know, the more you realise you don't know. And I found exams quite stressful, and for years I had nightmares waking up thinking I hadn't done revision and I had my final exams, but fortunately those have disappeared. And some of our lecturers were not there, so some subjects like ophthalmology and orthopedics, we didn't really have any teaching and we just had to learn from a book. So that was kind of interesting. But I really loved how we were always learning new things and interesting things. And then during vet school, we had some lectures about wildlife and exotics, which I really loved. And that got me interested in that. And then I had future opportunities to do that later. And we had a really great neurology lecturer who taught us a very valuable thing, that exams are not the be all and end all. And it's just a way that like we test people in the current day and age. And he always used to tell us that he failed his finals and he was an international neurology specialist, so all was not lost if he failed the random exam. And then by chance at university, at that time, Glaxo Wellcome, who I don't think they exist anymore, were doing grants for students to go to Cornell in the States summer school to do a research project. And I was really lucky that I got to do that and got to travel all around the States with the money that they paid us to do the research with that was left over. So that was what really got me into like the traveling and working bug even more.
So that's really cool. So you went there for a research project and then you had money left over. So you then traveled around seeing practice, or just traveling around seeing the States?
No practice. So we had a really long summer holidays. So we did 6 weeks of the research project. And then I think I had like nearly 10 weeks traveling around. I literally did a huge loop around the States and Canada on Amtrak on the train, because you could get really good student passes then. So it was, some of the people that I visited were the ones who I met on the leadership program. It was called the Leadership Training Program. And there was lots of people from America, Canada, Australia, and some from the UK. And lots of those people are still my really good friends now. And lots of them have gone on to high leadership positions, which I have not. I've taken a different direction.
So
squiggly one.
A squiggly one. So you chose, I mean, by the sound of things, pretty early on, the combination of, I guess, vet work, locuming, and adventures. That's your route.
Yes, I think I always used to joke that because my family, like my grandparents, were from all over the place, and then they all ended up in England, and so I always used to kind of say that I was a gypsy, and that was genetically in my roots to bounce around the place, because I find it really hard to stay in one place. So I think that's part of it, which a lot of people don't like, but I really like just turning up in a random place or going, oh yeah, I think I'll like get a job there, like what I've done now, and being like, oh, let's see how this pans out, with actually no idea what I'm doing.
Is that how you've generally chosen your jobs? Like you've chosen a place first and then looked for a job?
Yes. So certain areas, like, so when I was in the UK, because I really love the outdoors and hiking, I concentrated on like Devon and Yorkshire areas, because I knew those areas were really nice. I really liked hills and coastal areas. And then I would look for clinics in those areas that I thought I would like be compatible with. And so sometimes I just got jobs, through the advertising places, and other times I would approach them and say, I'm really interested in the things you are. Do you need a locum? Because lots of them hadn't really thought about it and often do.
That's interesting. Have you ever taken a full-time job, or have you always locumed?
Good question. So one of the reasons that I do locum a lot is that I think my first job was a permanent job, and it was so horrific that I left after 10 months, and have locumed pretty much since then. And then when I moved to New Zealand, which I think we're talking about later, I did have also one permanent job, and it was also quite awful. So both countries, I decided that locuming suited me more. And also, I'm not really into this 30 days a year holiday business. I like having longer holidays. So locuming is really good for that. And later on, when I was working, when we were really lucky, we had a pony. So I used to work for a few months and then go home for like a few weeks and ride the pony every day. So I was very lucky that I could do that.
So flexibility and basically being able to leave when you want Sounds like.
Well, fixed term contracts, so you know when there's light at the end of the tunnel.
So, doubling back to your Cornell leadership program. So, what happens after that? You come back to the UK, and then you set about looking for your first job.
So that was actually quite early. That was like in the middle of vet school, I think between third and fourth year. So I think after that, I intercalated, and I did, because I realized that I really loved the variety of doing different things. And I found vet school, although I loved it, it was really narrow-minded. So I decided to intercalate for a year. So you do like a different subject for a year. And I actually wanted to go to France to do the Erasmus, but my university wasn't really interested in like organising it. So I couldn't really work out how to do it. So I just did zoology for a year, which was interesting because, you know, in the definitely where we went to vet school anyway, you basically have a lot to learn. You go to lectures 9 till 5, you're spoon-fed all the information and you regurgitate for the exams. But in zoology and like most of the other degrees, you don't really have many lectures and you have to do a lot of self-directed learning. And I realized I was actually really bad at that and not very self-disciplined. And I found that way of like education quite different and difficult, which was really good realization. Because lots of other people liked having 4 hours of lectures a week and just doing the rest on your own. But I think for me, sometimes you need to be told what to do. Not often.
Yeah, it's probably quite a good, I would agree. And I think that's probably generally the way vet school works, right? You have a lot of info and you have to, it's actually, in a way, quote unquote, it's a relatively easy way of learning. You know, you're dealt all this stuff, you learn it, you regurgitate, and you're perhaps not taught enough independency skills. Would you agree?
Yes, very good point. So I think you're not really taught, well, certainly in our era, the dinosaur era, you're not really taught how to apply it. And we definitely, one of the big things that I really noticed in the New Zealand vet schools in the last few years, and I think in England as well, which they've really improved on, is that we had zero communication or business or, you know, kind of psychology education. And as we now know, many decades later, communication and relationships and how you speak to people are basically key to everything in your life, work, everything. And so a lot of the universities are teaching that now, and they're having a lot more role playing and scenarios and practical things, which I think is really good because they've realized that a lot of people who go to vet school are like really high performing type A personalities, and we can learn a lot of things, but we can't necessarily have a like functional conversation with members of the public. And I did really struggle with the human bit, to be honest, when I was younger.
Like a lot of us, in fact. Okay, so locuming rather than fixed jobs. When did you leave? How long did you stay in the UK then?
So I worked in the UK for 6 years after graduating, and I really wanted to do mixed animal stuff and do more large animal work, and eventually go overseas, because by complete fluke, my parents years ago worked in Australia, and I was born there, so I had an Australian passport, so I had dual nationality. So I thought, well, I really need to use this passport, and I want to go to Australia, but ended up in New Zealand. But the thing I found in England, it was really sad because there was a lot of, they'd had foot and mouth and the mad cow disease and stuff. And so you didn't really get to do much large animal stuff. And especially as I didn't have much experience in it, and it was almost like a vicious circle. And ironically, Sophie, when I was at vet school, I was so terrible at farm animal stuff. We had this thing where we had to put make a halter out of a rope and put it on a cow, and I couldn't even do that. And I remember my farm animal lecturer kind of shaking his head and being like, you know, you're pretty much doomed in the farm animal world, which is really ironic because I'm probably one of the few in my year who still is doing large animal practice and really loves it. So what ended up happening is I got a locum job by chance with a New Zealand guy in England, and he said, look, England's really rubbish. New Zealand's much better, and they've got bigger farms and you'll get a lot more experience. And he basically blagged me a job over there where he had worked. So after 6 years of doing kind of a mix of small mixed and a really small bit of large, I turned up in New Zealand to do a large animal job and didn't really even know what half the equipment was in the truck that they gave me. But they said, well, you're here now, we better teach you. And fortunately, again, by chance and luck, this was one of the biggest and best vet clinics in New Zealand. So I really lucked out and they taught me really well. And there was the vibe, they had a great team of people there. They employed people specifically who were really kind of travel-y and liked doing different things. So it was a great team and really solid basis to start from in a different country. Because again, I booked a flight to New Zealand and didn't really know where I was going or what it would be like. But when I got there, I really loved it. And I knew after 2 weeks that I wanted to stay there a long time. They're much more relaxed and totally different way of living and working there.
How would you describe the way of working and living?
So the way of working, unfortunately, has succumbed to the corporatization, as many countries have. But generally, the people are really laid back there. And it's quite practical. And I think I was maybe a little bit of a princess when I arrived. You know, everything has to be what we're told in England, gold standard. And I'd be like, oh, we need to do this and can't possibly do this without all these things. And you turn up on the farm and they say, well, you've got some string and some duct tape and a piece of plastic pipe and you need to fix it with this because that's what we've got. So that was actually a really good education working there because they're all really innovative. You know, they've got like the pioneer spirit. So they're very practical, like lots of really young guys are building houses, running their parents' farms with them. So I really loved that. And also the country is mostly really rural and I really like working in small rural communities. Some aspects of work were a little bit frustrating. They still don't really have insurance, like less than 10%. So often an animal would say have a broken leg and instead of sending it to a referral clinic, which could easily fix it, they would euthanize it, which I found really sad. And one of the big differences is the dairy farms are really big there and the cattle are worth quite good money. So at that stage, it was good because you got to do really quite high level, large animal work, which we never really got to do in England. So it was really good that I went there because, so for example, we were stomach tubing cows and taking blood tests and doing really interesting things like that you just would never really get to do in England because they just want you to put the cow down because it's not really worth anything. So I really liked it because you have to learn to think outside the box a bit, which in the beginning I found really difficult, but actually is really good for life and really helps me with a lot of my overseas adventures where you don't really have anything and you're in the middle of nowhere and you like not doing stuff is not an option. You have to find a way.
Yeah. MacGyver style, just get on and do it.
Yes. Yeah.
And so
they
how long did you
say like, oh, sorry.
How long did you stay in that job then for?
So I stayed in that job. Initially, my contract was 6 months, but I really loved it and asked to stay. And I ended up staying 18 months. And then I was just kind of replacing a girl who was away. And so then she really wanted to come back. So they said, look, we don't really have another job and she really wants to come back. So you really need to leave now and find another job. And it wasn't until I started looking for other jobs that I really realised how brilliant this clinic was and how much I'd learned. And it really put me in good stead. So I went locuming after that.
In New Zealand?
Yes.
So you decided to stay?
So I decided to stay. But again, with the locuming in England and New Zealand, my plan was I'll do different locums and then I'll find somewhere, you know, that I really want to stay and then I'll like stay for a long time. But I'm kind of still looking for that place.
Well, I suppose it may be, you know, the more nomadic you get, sort of thing. It's hard to, because you almost get used to putting your down your roots in a place, knowing that you're going to stay, knowing that you're going to move on, if that makes sense. So you feel comfortable, even though you're just going to stay maybe 6 months, a year. So I think it's harder to put down real roots the more you do that sort of thing.
Yes, it's really interesting because one of my friends recently, who I really admire, she's got a very good job and a house and a mortgage, and I have never had a house or a mortgage. She said to me, gosh, how do you do it? I couldn't really imagine like moving everywhere. But for me, it's so innate, it's normal. I couldn't imagine living somewhere for 5 years. So, which I think is a blessing and a curse sometimes. And someone said to me when I came to this job, actually, like, because I'm here for 2 years, you really need to concentrate, like this is your home now. But it's really hard because you keep thinking, what next? What am I going to do next? Where am I going to go?
Yeah, totally. So when do the adventure, I mean, this is already adventurous, right? You moving around, but your vet adventures, that you refer to, I know you've done the Iditarod several times, Mongolia, of course, and lots of other things. At what point, in the low coming period, you go, right, now I need to also factor in some more traveling and adventures?
So that started quite early on while I was in the UK. I think within a couple of years of graduating, maybe 2 or 3 years, and when I had enough money to like be really independent and be like, oh, I can actually afford to do really cool things now after paying off the massive student debt, which took a very long time. And I started looking for things to do in random locations. I think on that note, also, lots of people really value different things. So I really value freedom and traveling. Other people really value having a house and having roots. And so, and I couldn't afford to have a house and a mortgage and travel. So I decided I'd rather be really poor forever and travel and have experiences. And now I can never afford a house. So I think, after 2 or 3 years, and I really dived in the deep end, because I think the first really big trip I did was to West Africa, to Cameroon, which is really dangerous. And I was working with chimps and gorillas and lots of endangered primates. In an area where the mafia came in and logged and killed parents, and we were left scraping up the orphans in the jungle. So it was pretty wild and out there.
Jeez. How long did you do that for?
So I only did that for 3 months. And then a few years ago, I went back for a really short time and just visited some different projects for about a month. But it was quite crazy. So we had baby chimps and gorillas living in the house with us because they were really young. And also they were in enclosures, and we used to go and look at certain ones in the enclosures. And I didn't really, because I'd never done primate work before, I didn't really know what was normal in inverted commas. So with the chimp enclosure, there was lots of really young babies, and then there was an alpha male. And so one of the staff, Cameroonian guys, are really big and strong, luckily. He used to stand with a stick to make sure the alpha male didn't come near us, and we would go in and try and look at the little small babies. And then a few years later, when I went to Chester Zoo to a talk, and they were talking about their big primates, especially the chimps, and I said, oh, so what do you do when you go in the enclosure and do stuff with them? And they looked at me like I was completely crazy and said, we don't do that. So I decided it probably wasn't a good idea to tell them what happened to me and that I was still alive.
What's your most epic adventure, would you say?
Difficult to choose one. Mongolia was definitely out there, but I did some exotic animal experience in the States, where a friend of a friend said, oh, this guy's got a clinic and he's got really interesting things. So I emailed and said, could I come and see some of what they do? And there was 2 things during that time that were really amazing. One was they have lots of big cats there as pets that are legal. and a guy had a tiger that had broken its canine. And so it came into the clinic for a root canal treatment with the human dentist coming to do it. So this tiger was in the back of the pickup truck, driven into like a downtown Seattle office car park. The vet poked some ketamine into it, and somehow it didn't eat him. And then we had to put the tiger on a trolley, run down the alleyway and put it on the gas machine before it woke up, do the surgery, and then get it back in the truck before it woke up again. And I never really realised, I mean, I've never seen a tiger in the wild, but and I was doing the anaesthesia, the paw of the tiger is bigger than like your head. It's so gigantic. And I thought, yeah, if this thing wakes up, this is going to be really bad news for a lot of people.
Carnage.
Yes, literally. Luckily, it didn't wake up and everything went really smoothly. But the guy who owned it told us that he had 3 pets, that tiger, a mountain lion and a black bear. And all of them, when they were young, lived in the house with his children. That's how crazy they are in the States.
Jesus Christ. So how do you go about, like, how do you choose your trips, your vet adventures? I mean, what is it, you to have come across something? Is it you actively look for a certain adventure in a specific country?
So kind of a mixture. One of the things I really love about traveling, which I'm sure you know too, is when you travel, then you meet people and you find new opportunities. So, for example, I think I went to Thailand and did like this amazing mobile neutering program with a bunch of Danish people. And I didn't realize until I went there that they were all Danish. And then there was me and an Australian girl. And while I was there was one Danish guy there, and he said, "Oh, I really love sled dogs, and I want to go to Alaska, and there's this race called the Iditarod, and they take volunteer vets, and you should do it." And again, in my, oh yeah, this seems like a good idea with no research, I said, I looked it up and applied, and then got sent this long list of equipment that you need because it's minus 50 degrees there. In the winter, which I couldn't even buy in New Zealand. And by fluke met a guy on a bike ride who had his best friends live in Alaska that are now really good friends with me. And I went to stay with them, borrowed their clothes, and now I've been 3 times to do the sled dog race. But on that note, I kind of made my mark a bit because the first year I went, I fell out of a little bunk bed in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness and broke my wrist really badly. So I had to be bundled up in a sleeping bag, put on a skidoo, taken to a bush plane in the middle of the snow, and then I was loaded up with another team of sled dogs tucked under the chair, taken to a bush hospital to be given some painkillers, and then taken to another hospital where it cost my travel insurance $20,000 to mend my broken wrist. So that's another one of those really out there. Some of my friends, or one of my kind of alter egos, is Calamity Caroline, and that's a story is one of the reasons why.
But you've been back. You've been there 3 times in total. So, I mean, it must be a pretty amazing experience.
It's one of the most amazing experiences, and it's really difficult to describe. So you're in the middle of the wilderness in Alaska. Luckily, the bears are hibernating and the sea ice is really thick most of the time. And you just meet the most incredible people. Alaskan pilots are some of the toughest, most incredible people that I've ever met. The conditions that they fly in, at least twice when I was there, I thought we were going to die. And they all are really ice cool and say, "Oh yeah, everything's fine." And then you hear them afterwards being like, "Oh my God, I thought we were going to die." But we don't. And I don't know if you heard, there was a really terrible Alaskan air crash really recently in the Bering Sea, which kind of gave me shivers because the 2 little tiny towns that it flew between, I was on that exact flight last year when we're on the sled dog race, and it was really tragic accident. So they're really tough people. And also there's like National Geographic filmmakers, and then there's volunteers from all over the world, including vets. So it's really fantastic opportunity. And lots of people think that it's really cruel, like with the welfare of the sled dogs, but they're very rigorously checked, like physically. They have blood tests, they have ECGs, and there's very rigorous exams of the dogs. So if anything does go really wrong, it's not because they're not being looked after. It's like a really random, like some of them have had random cardiac events and just collapsed, which people have that. You can't really predict that. But from what I saw, they have really strict rules, and the welfare was really good of the dogs. But we had to do some things there, like treat wounds and things, and we're literally in the middle of nowhere with not really anything. So again, that was when the New Zealand thing really helps, because you have to get really innovative. But the local people, I mean, some of these tiny villages, they had 300 people living with them, and they barely really see daylight half the year, and they live by a frozen river that they can only really access in winter when it's frozen. So they really know how to like think outside the box.
I mean, exposure, I mean, I'm going to sort of put this out there, but, obviously it's with people traveling less, with carbon footprint, trying to be cautious about taking the plane, et cetera, But, I hear you, and I've traveled a lot, and the exposure that travel brings to you and the learning experiences, it's hard to imagine a world where you don't have access to that, and how different people would be, how different your life would have been, or my life would have been, if we hadn't traveled.
Definitely. And I think travel is really good. Like, obviously our generation is really lucky that it's so easy now to travel. Like in our parents' time, it wasn't so easy. But also I think it's really invaluable for like mentally, like making you more open-minded, having different experiences of cultures and ways of doing things. And I think it really helps you develop as a person, and also career-wise. Like, I've worked with lots of vets from all over the world, and a lot of them have really taught me a lot of really good or different ways of doing different things with their different knowledge and skill sets. And I really admire the Alaskans. They live in a really tough part of the world. And, obviously, like in Scandinavia and the north, it's similar. And in Mongolia in the north with the reindeer hunters. But a lot of those people who are in the simpler places seem to be a lot happier than the people in really capitalist big cities.
Yeah. What's an adventure that you haven't done yet that's on your radar?
I really want to go to Antarctica and work with some kind of seals or marine mammals. So I'm trying to work out how to do that. In the Falklands, there is the British Antarctic Survey people, but I've already established that they don't really take random volunteers. But we do have cruise ships here that stop in Antarctica, and we sometimes... there's a guy here who's got like a rat sniffing dog, because they have to be really strict that some of the islands here are rat free. So I've been on some of those and had a little look around. So I'm trying to work out a strategy of how to get there by hook or crook, because it's really hard to get research jobs, especially in the vet world. So I probably have to go and do another job, like be a cook or something, which clearly would be really disastrous for me.
Well, from what I've heard so far, I mean, and not about the cooking, but the way you've sort of winged your way into certain circumstances, I have no doubt that something will be put in your path that will lead you to that place. It's a little bit, it's almost like you make up your mind about something, and it's like the pathway is already set, except you don't really know which path there's going to be, but it's somewhere along the line it's going to happen.
Yes, definitely. And also, that's the other really great thing about traveling and working in different places, or working with people from different countries, because you never really know like where you're going to end up or what opportunities will come. And even like when I've done my recent travels in South America, which were not vet related, but we literally, myself and a friend, the last 3 or 4 trips we've done, we book the first 2 nights when we arrive because we're really jet lagged. And then we literally have 6 weeks of winging it around the country. And again, some of my friends have said, oh my God, like you don't have plans. How can you do that? But these countries are so crazy and really wild and unpredictable. If you did have plans, they wouldn't work out. So it's actually good to just go day by day, week by week. And we've had probably most really incredible traveling I've done is doing that.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm pretty sure we could talk about the vet adventures for hours. But, you know, I'm very conscious of the to-do list we have in terms of what the subjects we have. Canine arthritis, pain management, house visit stuff. So what's that all about?
So about, nearly 5 years ago, I had a really awful back injury when I had moved back from the UK back to New Zealand. And I realised that the medical system was really not set up for any kind of chronic pain management, and basically had to do all the research to get better myself, because I was just told the pain's in your head and there's nothing really can really do about it. And when you've been like this for 6 months, we'll send you to some rehab place and learn how to live with not being able to walk. And so I decided that wasn't really ideal, seeing as I needed to be able to walk and work because I am like on my own. So I got really interested in like the brain and how it like relates to pain and processes pain. And really, like when they say it is in your head, it's kind of true, but also like it's a way of it's true but not true. And so I by chance came across a course called by a brilliant company called Canine Arthritis Management, run by a very, really highly motivated UK vet called Hannah Capon, who her dog had really bad arthritis and she really tried everything to get it to like live longer and get better. But as we know, eventually there's only so many drugs you can give for so long. And when I started doing this training, I realized there's lots of crossover between like the humans and dogs of like pain management and all the things that really help. And also as because I got injured and I couldn't work for a really long time, and then I couldn't get a job in my town because I didn't, a part-time job because I didn't have children, I decided that I really needed to find a different way of working. So I started doing mobile vet work, and including acupuncture, which I had on myself. And I realized it's actually really good when you go to people's houses because the animals are much more relaxed and it's easier to treat them and examine them most of the time. And also what this course teaches you is, which is really vital, is that drugs are only one tiny part of when an animal and a human is in pain. And there's so much you can do in the house to modify the environment that can really have almost as much beneficial effect as giving painkillers, like, for example, putting rugs down, avoiding slippery stairs, making sure that they don't have like really uneven surfaces in the garden and things, using little ramps. So it kind of empowers owners because they're not really just dependent on, my dog's really sore, you need to give it medication. And if the dog's in a place where it's sitting in, so I had recently a case where initially we gave the dog some painkillers, and when I went to the house, the dog was only using a really minuscule part of the house because its one option was going down some really slippery stairs that it couldn't get up or down properly, or the other option on the other exit was going on the really slippery lino floor. So it just chose to not really go anywhere in the house or be near the owners, and no amount of drugs is really going to fix that. So the owners have now seen, like, you buy some mats and some rugs and tweak a few things, and it really helps. Like, it helps the animal move more, get more stimulation, and also improves the human-animal bond because, you know, the pets and the owners really like spending time with each other. And if it's really difficult for the pet to get to where the owner is, that's really sad for both parties.
That's super interesting. So, and is that something that you sort of try and put in place wherever you work?
So I started doing it just before I left New Zealand, but it was really early days because I'm still finishing off the training. It's really long training and really detailed and very good. And in the job that I'm in now, because it's a really weird setup where we have some days where we're on clinics and other days where we have, like, in inverted commas, admin. So we have much more leeway and more time to do things like that. So I asked them, I said, I really want to set this up here because I think it will really make a big difference. And I've got the knowledge and we have the time. And also I'd really like to teach the other vets. So I think this place is a really good place to start trialing it. I think some people have been a bit confronted, like, oh, like the vet wants to come to my house, she must think I'm a really bad owner, which has been really weird reaction. I've never had that before. So a lot of it is, like we were saying before about communication, just saying this is not really a reflection on the care of your pet. This is us trying to work together to really get a better solution. And some of these animals end up taking less drugs, which obviously is really good. Yeah. And they also live longer because they're more pain-free or in less pain.
And this course is a course that's accessible in English? How accessible is it? Yeah.
It's really accessible. So I'm doing it here in the Falklands, but it's based in the UK, but it's all online and it's self-directed learning. So I think you have about a year access. There's 15 modules, so it's a lot. But I find it really fascinating because there's so much similar things between humans and dogs that are really similar. And I think there's also a course for owners. So anyone who's got internet can do this course. It's in English. I think they might have just changed it so that they are doing it in other languages as well. I'm not 100% sure. But I would really recommend it. And even if you're an owner, I think there's a shorter course you can do, just because lots of people aren't even really, this is kind of like a new way of thinking. And so lots of owners aren't really aware, like, oh, we could just like put some rugs down or put a baby gate or put some grippy stuff on the steps. And that will really make a huge difference. No one's really thought like that before because we historically haven't really been to people's houses. But I think since COVID as well, a lot of people are doing more mobile work. And I spoke on an online conference really recently in the States, and a lot of vets are doing really similar stuff like that and incorporating that as well into like palliative care.
Yeah, fantastic. Fascinating. Super motivating as well, I think, for vets, and to be able to have, so much more of an impact, rather than just being diagnosed, treat, you're looking at, much bigger picture.
Yes. Having said that, in the normal corporate model, it would be really impossible to do this because it takes a bit of preparation. You're nearly about 1 hour in the house and then you write the report and discuss it with the owners. So it really is quite time consuming, but you charge accordingly. And I found when I was doing the mobile stuff that I really loved the interaction with the humans and animals and not being you've got 15 minutes to get in and out. You can really solve a lot more problems.
Yeah. And presumably you could get nurses, involved in that sort of.
Yes, it doesn't have to be a vet to do this. I think vets have to prescribe. But I think nurses are starting to do this kind of thing because lots of it is really just common sense and ergonomics.
Exactly.
What is compromising the quality of life and how can we address that?
Yeah. So you talked, as you sort of introduced the subject about, the brain and pain. You also mentioned the brain, body, gut. Is that something that you looked into around the same time?
Yes, again, because of what happened to me. So I had a really horrendous drug reaction as from a drug called pregabalin. I don't know if you have that in France. It's a really strong painkiller that's suddenly got really popular for some reason. In some people, it's really good for nerve, because I had really severe nerve pain. I had like a lower back disc injury. And for other people, including me, and literally tens of thousands of other people, but it's not really well publicized because probably Big Pharma tries not to. It can damage the part of your brain that produces hormones. And so I had a lot of the hormone part of my brain didn't really work properly. And I also I ended up having to have a hysterectomy. And weirdly, after that, I got really gluten and dairy intolerant. And so I started kind of looking into like how all this works. And, when you take tablets, any kind of oral medication, you really need to digest in your gut. And interestingly, the gut is where a lot of your hormones and a lot of the neurotransmitters that make your muscles and joints and things work are all made in the gut. So your diet is like really vital for your brain health. And, people always say you are what you eat. And, a lot of us, including me, were like, oh, yeah, that doesn't really apply to me. I can still sit running and eat 6 cream eggs and everything's fine because I've burnt it off, which I literally used to do. But it really made me realize that lots of people now are talking about the microbiome, and it's become like a really big thing now. And interestingly, the conference that I went to really recently, a lady who does, there was a lot of alternative medicine people. She does herbal medicine. She was saying that there's a lot of the last 5 years, she's seen a lot of really severe gut disease in dogs. And also a lot of people are, all these kids are getting being born with like 20 allergies to really weird foods, and dogs are getting really intolerant of things. And a lot of that is because of the monoculture. And there's a pesticide that I think it's banned in Europe, but it's really common in New Zealand, where celiac is really common, called glyphosate, that is basically sprayed on all wheat before it's harvested. And all this genetically modified stuff has changed. So what is in wheat and bread now isn't really what was in there 50 years ago. So people's gut, like fauna, is really different. And a lot of that can literally change your brain. And so even now I read a thing recently where children with ADHD they did a trial where they were given fish oil, which seems like really random, but omega-3 fatty acids, and it improved their ADHD.
Yeah, it's super interesting. They've seen that in depression as well, the usage of omega-3s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and vitamin D.
Yeah, yeah, for maybe slightly different reasons, but and so where has that led you? Like these sort of investigation, has it? Well, obviously on the canine side of things, it's modified. On the arthritis pain management, it's modified your practice. Has the brain body gut approach also changed the way you look at things in practice?
Yes. So I started realizing with my very unpleasant experiences in the New Zealand health system that once you get to your mid-40s and you're kind of perimenopausal, when you walk into the doctor's surgery, they don't really listen to what you say, and they just write you off as stressed, hormonal, or really emotional. And I was a vet. I had really probably, not being arrogant, but like fairly above average medical knowledge of what was wrong with me, because as vets, we have really good experience in our jobs of multiple body systems and how they work together. And I discovered that the medical system really doesn't have that. And so I kept seeing all these different specialists, and none of them could put together what was going on. And I worked out all of it, and I kept saying something was really wrong, and they kept telling me nothing was wrong. And at one point, I really thought I was going to die because I was so sick, and I had nearly 3 years off work. And I've had to change my whole career subsequent to that because I still have to take certain medication. So it was really damaging, like mentally, financially, and physically. And I realized that if it was difficult for me as a vet who really understood a lot of this to advocate for myself, I met a lot of women along the way who were in a really bad way and not getting better because they were just told nothing was wrong or it's in their heads. So I've set up this little, it's kind of in its infancy, but it's one of my little dreams, a thing called jigsaw tribes, because obviously we're all bits and pieces put together, which is the jigsaw, and tribes, like we're all really trying to find our tribes in life, and people really need tribes to survive, and we need to work together. And I started kind of informally doing like female holistic health coaching. And I've helped a lot of my friends who have been told, by the doctors, there's nothing really wrong or there's nothing really they can do. And so I really want to expand that, because just to educate women and empower them with the knowledge so they can advocate for themselves and really find the help that they need, and not just be told there's nothing we can really do, you're just hormonal and this is how it is. One of the other things I noticed on that note is that testosterone is really highly available and free for male hormonal issues, but to get female hormone treatment is really sometimes very difficult, and in a lot of places really expensive. There's still a big mismatch, even though 50% of the population is female, and at some point will really need hormones and or help.
It's crazy, isn't it, that we're still there, we're still at that point.
I think, people like Davina McCall and some of the celebrities like Rachel Hunter have really spoken about it and put it out there. But even here, so because of the damage I had from the drugs, and then I had the hysterectomy, I had immediate menopause, which was, I really wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. So now I have to take hormones. They were too high and now they're really low. But even here, the pharmacist said to me recently, I found the culprit of the doctor who's prescribing all these things, like it was a really bad thing. And I don't think, unless you've been in that situation where your hormones are not working, it's not really possible to understand how damaging it can be. Like, a lot of women are leaving their jobs because they can't really cope with life because their hormones are really unbalanced. But there is things you can do to help. And, there are herbal things as well. Some of my friends don't take it. Hormones, they take herbs and things. I haven't found things that work for me. But my point is that I feel like a lot of women are just really written off and that there's nothing we can do, but actually there's a lot. And if you say, what I did was I kind of educated myself and said, I've learned about this is what I'd like. We really need to talk about this, but it was still a really big struggle. So I feel it's really important. The more you talk about this, the more people will talk about it and the more awareness there will be, because the general international medical system is still really behind in chronic pain management and hormones. And those two things can be really highly linked as well. Like, I got really high estrogen from the pregabalin, and estrogen, when it's really high, can be really inflammatory and made my nerve pain a lot worse. And no one really knew that. I didn't know that until I started researching.
Yeah, and as you said, the number of people who are actually at your level and are able to go and research these things is few and far between, really, if you look at it in the general population.
Definitely, I was quite shocked when I started meeting women who were like really unwell and had been unwell for quite a long time because they were just told there's nothing we can really do. And so when I ended up in hospital really early with my injury because my pain was so severe I couldn't literally move or walk or get out of bed. And they told me, when you've been like this for 6 months, you can go and learn how to live with it. So I realized really early on I was going to have to do the work to solve this because the medical system didn't really know how to. And that's quite frightening. Their answer was to give me 7 different kinds of painkillers, none of which worked at all. And that's when I really started realizing that there's more to this. It's not just drugs.
Yeah.
And I met a guy in hospital who, the thing that really turned it around is I met a guy in hospital who had a really bad injury and had broken bones and was on no painkillers. And he said to me, I said, what's this all about? I was on a ketamine drip by then. And he said, I was in the army and we got taught to block out pain with our brain. And that's what really set me on like the journey of all this. And so I stopped all the drugs and I didn't really have any difference in my pain. And now my pain is very minimal and I'm not taking any drugs. And, there's people on oxycodone for nearly years with really similar injuries to me. It's really scary.
And so you educated yourself to feel differently? Is that?
So that's a whole nother hour of chat. One of the things that really affects pain, I discovered. So while I was in hospital, they often forgot to give me my painkillers. And so I woke up in pain, got really angry, and then was told that I needed to see a psychiatrist. So eventually and then my hormones were really crazy. So I got sent to a psychologist because I was really angry. But that turned out to be a golden thing because she started really delving into started asking these questions, which I didn't think were really relevant to my injury, like what was your childhood like? And it was pretty messy. And it turns out if you've had, and you'll probably empathize with this a little bit, Sophie, if you've had like really tumultuous childhood emotionally when you're really young, your nervous system becomes very on edge. And so that becomes your default mode. So if you get like a really bad injury later in life, your nervous system goes completely haywire. And what had happened was when I broke my wrist at that time in 2008, I had really severe pain in my wrist for months and months afterwards. And they kept saying, oh, the pain's in your head. And and it was really painful and I couldn't work then for a long time. And I was diagnosed with this thing called chronic regional pain syndrome. And that was the beginning of the wind up of the nervous system. And at that time, I had a really awful job that was really stressful. And so the combination of lots of those things was really bad. And I noticed after that injury, my nervous system was really irritable and normal painkillers don't really get rid of nerve pain. And then when I had the back injury about 10 years later, that was after my dad had died, lots of my friends had died, I'd had really bad experiences in a different job. And so all these things really compounded. So it's kind of a really fascinating journey.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure we could talk about it for hours. It's really interesting. We'll put some of the links in if you'd gladly send them to us about some of the reads you've had.
Definitely.
All these things, you tell me you'd like to wrap them up in some books. Are you actually writing at the moment? Is it a sort of long-term plan?
It's a long-term plan. The books are in my head, Sophie. So I want to write one book about this pain journey thing because I feel like a lot of these things haven't really been put together and a lot of people really don't know about this. And I've watched quite a few TED Talks and a lot of them have been about chronic pain or different things, but none of them have really put all of this together. So that's what my little dream is of doing a TED Talk, because things like that, you can really get the message out there. Like by talking to a lot of people rather than just writing a little article here and there, which is what I kind of started at the beginning with. And the reason I really started talking about this in the beginning was because the doctors weren't really listening to anything I said. And then I met all these people who were really unwell and realized that we all need to talk about this because we need to help other people help themselves. And sorry, I've forgotten the beginning of what you said.
We're talking about eating, talking about writing books, and you getting the message out, and a TED Talk also being a great way to get the message out.
And I'd also like to write a book about the vetty adventures because I think, and I'm sure you've had really similar, a lot of these overseas trips, even if they're just traveling or working, there's a lot of lessons that you can learn along the way from like your culture and your experiences and what you see and what you do and how things pan out and how you really adapt to things. And I did a talk a few years ago called Lessons Learned on the Hoof, I think it was. And someone asked me to write, what not just talk about, all the things you've done, but what you've learned. And there's actually like a really long list of things that if you don't leave the country and have those experiences, you probably wouldn't really necessarily have learned. So I think it's really enriching. So I'd like to write about that kind of, and I'm quite good. I write kind of little My Calamity Caroline comedy stories, and my friends keep saying, "Oh, you really need to write a book." And then I thought, yeah, maybe I will, but I'm not really sure when I'm going to get time to do that.
It's on your to-do list. So what would be, if you had a top 3 of lessons learned in your life and traveling adventures, veterinary adventures?
I think number 1 is to a la Mongolia, expect the unexpected. Like sometimes with our little perfectionist A-type vetty personalities, and we get a bit OCD and be like, we have to have everything in controlled and everything planned, and we know how everything's going to work out. And as we know, in our life and in work, that often doesn't really happen. And so just to learn to try not to control outcomes and just take things as they come and deal with them as they come, which sounds really simple and easy, but I still sometimes find really difficult. And the other thing is to, when you think things are really negative or challenging, try and view them as opportunities for like growth. Or I think I read recently, today I was reading something that people saying no, instead of thinking that's a rejection, think of it as that it's not right now, and find ways around doing things. And I had to get really resourceful when I had a really long time off work with no income. That's another lesson, get income protection, which I did not, of trying to find help or do things for free, or really just like barter services and just get really innovative. And I think probably the third thing would be just be, which I think I learned really on, not necessarily from traveling, but someone told me the phrase is like, don't be furious, be curious. So if someone makes you really angry or you think something's really not going your way, instead of thinking, oh, that's terrible, ask questions about, oh, what makes you think that way? Especially like in West Africa, I was quite young when I went there and I really struggled with the culture and didn't really behave great there in respect of, I was really confrontational to their confrontation, which doesn't really go down well. And now I would know different. So ask questions of people, because when people behave in a way that you think isn't really appropriate or nice or okay, there's normally an underlying reason. Like we all have our little triggers and things. So sometimes it's really interesting asking different questions to find out what's underneath. And that can really help forge relationships and lead you to more opportunities.
I like that. What, because there are always vets listening to this podcast, and vets that want to, young vets, or in fact even older vets who want to, go about traveling and do some veterinary adventures abroad. What would be the best piece of advice, do you think?
So a lot of people say, oh, I can't do it until I've done this or that, or when I've finished like X course. And I did that in the beginning, but there's always going to be a reason that you think you're not really ready and you can't really do things. And I think COVID has really made people realize that life is short and unpredictable and you never really know what's going to happen. So decide what you really like, the kind of people that you really like being around, and also where you really like I really like sunny places, which I'm not quite sure how I ended up in the Falklands, and just literally do it. So I saw recently a girl on LinkedIn, a vet, who said, oh, I've just left my job and I'm going to a diving course in Honduras for 6 weeks and I don't really know what I'm going to do after that. And someone actually tagged me and said, oh, Caroline will have advice. And I said, yeah, just go and do it, because not really knowing what's going to happen is probably one of the best things. Like the feel the fear and do it anyway thing. I've turned up in lots of places where I've literally had no idea what I'm doing or what's going to happen. But we're often stronger and more adaptable than we think we are. And the more people say, when you get out of your comfort zone, you grow. I really think it makes you a stronger person. And sometimes you really surprise yourself what you can do or achieve or, just find in the world.
Yeah, I love it. And finally, if you were to look at the young Caroline coming out of vet school, what would you say to her?
Quite a few things. I'm sure we've all got a long list. One of them is communication and relationships and boundaries, which I think a lot of us didn't have, which is why a lot of us got burnt out, are literally key to everything. And so if you learn about how you speak to yourself and the language you use and how you speak to other people and get that sorted, life is a lot better. And the second thing would be 3 main things. The second thing, don't be so hard on yourself. Like, we're often really critical of ourselves and project that onto other people. And, try and be, talk to yourself like you would to a friend, which is for most of us an ongoing journey. And 2 more small things. The other one is, which I think it took a lot of us a really long time, and definitely me, be yourself. And like, social media can be really damaging because everyone seems to be having a great time because we don't really post the bad things. And do what you want and don't do what other people think you should or shouldn't do or how you do it. And doesn't really matter what other people think as long as you're happy with what you're doing, and follow your passions, do what you love. Yeah, like what I alluded to earlier, spend time with people that you really like. Also, I think really important, tell people that you love them, because a lot of us don't. And because we never know like what's going to happen tomorrow. And a lot of us can get really caught up in our own heads with that kind of thing.
Loads of very sound advice, which we'd all wish we had when we were a lot younger.
All of us wish we had that.
Caroline, thank you so much. I think we've covered every single topic that you had on your list. Is there anything you'd like to add that perhaps has come to your head or that we haven't covered?
Just one thing, which is in my little dream list. I really love reading. And another thing that I would encourage people to do, which I did when things were really bad for me, is if you love reading, I read a lot of biographies and of people who'd done like really inspirational things and overcome crazy things. And, God, I think the whole what doesn't kill you make you stronger thing is a really true thing. And if I'd looked back and knew that all these things were going to happen to me, I didn't really think I would have survived them. And sometimes when you think really terrible things have happened, you actually become a better and stronger person after that. So I would just say, find your tribe, be yourself, and help. I think when we've had really bad things happen, then we can help other people from that. And that we don't always really realize that in the beginning. And so I have another little random social media page where I do book reviews of random books. And I'd really like, with my third job, like you, to do be a book reviewer, because I think that's like one of the best jobs ever. Mm-hmm. So if anyone needs some books reviewed, please let me know. And one last thing, one of my little dreams, if anyone knows how to do this, I'd love to set up. So we, in New Zealand, we get lots of really bad natural disasters. And obviously that's a really big problem in the world right now. And I got really obsessed with drones a while ago. I'm not sure why. And I'd like to work out a way to establish like a network of drones that you can drop medical supplies into cut off or isolated areas. In Rwanda, they already do that with really remote places with human medical. So there must be a way, if anyone wants to talk to me about that.
Big shout out there. Well, you never know where these words may land. So watch this space.
Exactly.
Thanks very
so
much. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm sure we could have gone on talking for hours. As I said, we like to keep these English international episodes a little bit shorter. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your little bit of your traveling, your experiences, and many, many words of wisdom. So thanks very much.
And merci beaucoup for the opportunity, Sophie. Lovely to reconnect.
Merci d'avoir écouté cet épisode de Veto Micro. Si le cœur vous en dit, partagez-le à vos amis et à vos collègues, abonnez-vous au podcast et mettez-nous une note de 5 étoiles avec un gentil commentaire. C'est ce qui nous permet de remonter dans les classements et de donner de la voix à la profession. Si vous souhaitez participer à Veto Micro, nous suggérer des invités ou tout simplement nous écrire, faites-le sur l'adresse podcast@themavet.fr. Prenez soin de vous et à la semaine prochaine pour écouter une nouvelle façon d'être vétérinaire.